Roe v. Wade. That's what many experts are saying in one of the biggest court cases to come along in the Supreme Court in quite some time. That has many people either on edge or very excited at the possible outcome. And for the next hour or so, we are going to be covering all angles of the latest case in the Supreme Court, Dobbs versus Jackson, that could have huge implications. And as some are saying, essentially overturn Roe v. Wade. So we're going to have full team coverage here for you today. And joining me right now is Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips. What's going on, guys?
Doing well.
Hey.
All right, so we've got a lot of team coverage here coming up, and Dan, just so you know, in my ear I can hear myself right now, so so it's throwing me off a little bit, but we'll keep going. We're going to be talking to Tara Mergener, who is out at the courthouse right now, and already some people are coming out, and so let's take a look and talk to Tara and get a little bit about what's going on there on the scene.
Hi, guys. Okay, so Stephen, we're having some audio issues here, but he was basically saying he's come here all the way from Boulder, Colorado, and he's very concerned about separation of church and state, among other things. Very concerned about violence, right? That's another thing you said you were concerned about as well. We can't hear you, unfortunately, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. If we get this fixed, we'll come back.
Yeah, well, let's start back from the beginning, Tara, because I don't think the audience caught what you said off of the top. So you were kind of describing the scene. So why don't we go back there and talk about what is happening on the ground there, the people that have showed up that you've interacted with so far?
Well, right. Well, of course, tomorrow is the big day, the day the case actually commences. But people are gathering here already. We've got a press conference going on right now. Abortion-free states, that is a group, a pro-life group, and they've come here from Oklahoma, and a number of speakers have gotten on. And one of the things that they said right off the top is that Roe is crumbling. So you can sort of feel the mood there, that there's a lot of enthusiasm among the pro-life movement, that this could be it. This could be the thing that either undoes Roe or makes a big dent in it with more abortion restrictions. So a lot of enthusiasm, a big group here. We'll take another look. You know, a lot of folks gathering. Of course, nothing like tomorrow when there are expected to be a number of protests going on here in front of the Supreme Court. We were talking to Stephen just a few minutes ago. Right at this moment, he is the only one here for the pro-choice movement. He is concerned about separation of church and state if this case succeeds. And so just a lot of emotion and passion. You know, it's the most significant challenge to Roe v. Wade in 30 years. We've got a lot of groups planning to be here tomorrow from both sides. A whole list I have here, you know, supporting abortion, Women's March, Center for Reproductive Rights, National Abortion Access Coalition, Pro-Choice America. And on the side of the pro-life, we've got Empower Women, Promote Life. We've got a slew of pro-life women just around here right now. A number of pro-life politicians are going to be here. And I was saying earlier also that there's going to be a lot of security, of course. Anytime you have something with this much emotion going on, an issue like this, abortion, one of the most emotional issues there are. So it's going to be very interesting to see, but people are coming in from all over the country and beyond to voice their opinions on this case one way or the other, guys.
Are there any estimates on the number of people who will be out there? You mentioned a lot of the groups that are going to be there. I'm assuming it's going to be a very large presence.
Yeah, I would be safe to say that you could expect thousands of people tomorrow. I think that's probably a pretty good estimate. I mean, certainly they're going to be bussing people in from all over the country. There's people here already. And I think, you know, I've been here for these big cases before. I think the sidewalks are going to be filled. Obviously, you can see the steps of the Supreme Court. They're going to keep everybody back, but the streets will be filled. It will be extremely noisy. But certainly it will not want for attention. This case is getting so much attention because it is so significant on this issue, but definitely jam-packed, guys.
And Tara, you mentioned the one gentleman you talked to who is pro-choice, and he's there right now. We've also seen some responses from Democratic lawmakers who are expressing concern, saying overturning this through this case could mean revolution. What kind of signaling, what kind of messages are you seeing from the left, from the pro-choice crowd, about what this could mean long term if this is ultimately overturned?
Well, they're definitely worried that this is going to be the beginning of the end of abortion access. That's what they're claiming. The end of the separation, as Stephen said, of church and state, that women are not going to be able to access this procedure the way they can now. And again, because this is the first major challenge to this in so long, and it looks like to conservatives, to the pro-life movement, that they may actually have a chance here. So definitely the reproductive rights issue is what they're claiming, that women are it's going to hurt them. What you're not hearing a lot of talk about is the effect on the babies, of course, but they're very concerned, again, about women are just not going to be able to access this. They're concerned that opening this door could lead to Republican-led states coming up with more restrictions to abortion. So I think to sum it up, they're worried about the domino effect here, that if this case, depending on how it plays out, could really put a crack in the pro-choice argument.
All right, CBN's Tara Mergener there at the Supreme Court ahead of the huge Dobbs versus Jackson case. Tara, we'll stay in touch in case anything looks like it's fairly still in the early stages of people starting to show up. Obviously, like you said, it's going to be crazy down there tomorrow. And so we'll stay in touch in case anything starts to build there now in the next hour or so while we're still on. But we appreciate you being down there and giving us this report.
Of course. At this point, it's just a lot of prayer and prayer music and that kind of thing. But yeah, if anything happens, we'll be right here.
All right. Thanks so much, Tara. All right, Billy and Trey. As we go through and talk about this case, there are so many interesting angles to it. I mean, why did the Supreme Court take it in the first place? And just what kind of precedents is this going to set in the future? What does it mean? What does it really mean to overturn Roe v. Wade? Since those words probably won't be in the actual decision, and the decision won't come for some time.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of confusion. There are a lot of people out there who assume that if those words were said, if Roe v. Wade were to be wiped out, that abortion would suddenly disappear throughout America, that there would be no more abortion, that every state would restrict it. And that is not the reality. The reality, as we will talk about throughout the next hour, is much more complicated than that, regardless of how this case turns out.
Yeah, and I think there's concern over whether is this going to be something that, like Tara mentioned, is a domino effect and that could empower states. Or is it going to set a new precedent, or is the court going to be really, really narrow with how they decide this case? So I think that's something, obviously the decision's not going to come until probably the summer of next year. So that's something that's going to take time to figure out, but we're going to see those arguments from both sides, both the pro-life side positively, and then obviously the pro-choice side negatively, making those arguments and shaping up the debate.
All right, well, let's bring in now former CBN correspondent Paul Strand, who has covered the Supreme Court for many, many years. Paul, thanks so much for spending a few minutes here with us on this live stream coverage on CBN.
Oh, you're welcome. And let me tell you, from the big cases I've seen in the past, that sidewalk that Tara was on, you will not be able to move on that sidewalk. There will be so many tens of thousands of people packed in there.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember as we were talking about this yesterday, Paul, you had mentioned that in your years of covering the Supreme Court, you didn't usually see many people out ahead of time, and it seemed like there was at least a smattering of people already beginning to fill in for this one.
That's the biggest I've seen a day in advance.
That is interesting, perhaps a harbinger of things to come. So why don't we just dive right in here, Paul, and talk a little bit about what exactly is at stake here.
Yeah, well, first of all, it is indeed a fact that abortion will not suddenly disappear from the country. If the court did decide the wild thing of overturning Roe v. Wade, which I'm not sure it will do, but we can talk about that a little bit later. But if they did, what's likely to happen is there's already 18 states that will immediately ban abortion, as far as it looks like the numbers are. But 13 states are already set to have it be legalized no matter what the court says. So you got 18 states on the pro-life side, 13 states on the pro-choice side. That leaves about 19 in the middle. So in other words, what we could really see that's interesting is a divided America, an abortion-free America, and then the states where you can still get abortions. So that could be a real divide in the country, and you might see people moving to states just because of where they can get abortions or they can't. 40% of people on the pro-choice side say that they can't stand the idea of living in a state that doesn't have abortion access. So it's a really hot issue. And so I think that'll be one of the most interesting things we see. And then where does abortion go from there when you've got a country so divided? Where does the legislation go? Where do future court rulings go?
Let's talk about the morality of that, because obviously this is one of those deep sort of visceral issues. And you just mentioned that 40% statistic. So let's talk about the pro-choice side. What is it that leads them to believe that they are so morally right about this issue?
Yeah, that's I think it's got a lot to do with the American character in a way. And the reason I think it's so hard for the court to even conceive of getting rid of Roe v. Wade is the one thing that never happens in America is that you see rights sort of sliding away, if you know what I mean. In other words, they rarely take away something from Americans. And so I think that's why you hear this talk about there could be possibly revolution and things like that, because people will say, hold it here, you're taking my right away to do this. And of course, what that ignores is what about the right of that child? And then the way that the Supreme Court decided that in 1973 was to say, well, is the fetus viable? And all of a sudden, if the fetus is viable, that matters. And the court seemed to suggest then that if the child is still, dependent on the mother for its survival, maybe it's not so much a life then. So that was kind of a weird decision, I thought, back at the time even, that, well, how can you say that? How can you say just because the baby could survive outside the womb, it's not still a valuable human being inside the womb? I mean, just a few weeks in, these babies have all their fingers move. They have a preference for right hand or left hand. Their heart's beating. In other words, it's an amazing thing for the court to have decided that a non-viable fetus is really not worthy of, you could go ahead and abort it. So that's some of the morality on both sides. And I think the pro-choice side, they just can't believe that women would lose what they consider a concrete right at this point because it's been around for like 50 years. So that's sort of the dividing line morality-wise.
Yeah, so I think also you mentioned previous court cases, and obviously in the post-Trump presidency era, the court makeup has changed quite a bit, and this is obviously a potential serious challenge to Roe. What do you think it means with the current court makeup? How could this go based on that?
Yeah. Now here's the major reason this case is suddenly important. For one thing, I think in the past when it was looking more like a liberal majority and a conservative minority, I don't think the justices would have taken a case where they say, we will now decide about the future of Roe, which they're doing here. They're saying the main thing they're considering is the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade, and whether it's constitutional to say that the only abortions that can happen, should be these pre-viable fetuses. So that's a major turning point, I think, that they're even considering it. But some folks say that the way the court's divided now is 6 conservatives, 3 liberals. I tend not to think so. I tend to think more like, the deep state. Most of these court members, 8 of them, are basically sort of deep state members. They went to the Harvard or Yale, things like that. Amy Coney Barrett's sort of the rare exception that she doesn't seem to be like right from the swamp itself as these other justices are. And so you have to worry about them, like, what are they going to be thinking about their colleagues, their friends, the people they go to cocktail parties with? In other words, are they worried about the fact that they will be shunned by all these denizens of the deep state? And I worry especially about the Chief Justice, who, by the way, he really does have a sway over the court. He's the one who makes the major decisions about who's going to get to write the opinion, things like that. And Chief Justice Roberts has been very wobbly on the abortion issue. So I'm not even sure we can trust that he's part of this. They say he's part of the 6-3 conservative majority, but I worry about him most of all. And he has ruled for abortion in past cases. also against. So, like I said, the man's wobbly on it. I think we can pretty much get Amy Coney Barrett for sure on the pro-life side. I think Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, probably Alito, definitely Thomas for sure. So I think there's a majority possible there. But everybody in past cases, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, have done cases where conservatives have been disappointed in them. So it's not a slam dunk. And like I said, this is such a huge thing. And it's been such a precedent for so many years. You have to think about the justices going, A, what is everybody going to think about me? B, what's the precedent? What's stare decisis? We've already ruled on it. And the justices don't like to go and overrule themselves from the past. So there's that to also consider. But the thing is that I think most people, when they really look at it, say that Roe v. Wade wasn't really constitutionally decided. It was more like the court just said, there's a lot of people who want abortion legal. I think we're just going to go along with it. And it really doesn't matter what the Constitution says. They didn't say it that blatantly, but that to me was what the ruling basically was. It was going above and beyond the Constitution. They just suddenly magically found this right to abortion in the Constitution, which never mentions it, of course. And there we have it. And so I think there's plenty of legal reasons for them to say it's time to overturn this thing and maybe let it go back to where it was in 1973 when the states on their own, one by one, were deciding this issue. They were listening to their people, and maybe it's time to go back to that. And like I said, 18 states, it'll be illegal abortion. 13 states, it'll be legal for sure. The rest in the middle, who knows where they'll go. But maybe that's a better way in a republic is to, let the people weigh in. Let the state legislatures weigh in. Let this go back to the people. It obviously has been controversial, hotly controversial, one of the most controversial issues in all of America for half a century. So I think they really couldn't lose if they would just send it back to the states.
Well, so now that you've given a nice, balanced, well-rationed sort of explanation about where everybody stands on this, now before we let you go, I want you to handicap it. What does your gut tell you as someone who's reported on the Supreme Court for many years? Which way do you think this is going to go, if you want to say?
Yeah, I hate to say it on a CBN broadcast, especially the Christian Broadcasting Network, but I am so suspicious of these guys worrying about the reputation of the court and what all the folks out there in the deep state will think of them if they overturned it. I tend to think their easy excuse would be, well, there's so much precedent here. We can't really go against everything that we've said in the past and just suddenly overrule Roe v. Wade. So that's my guess, and that would be a very, very tight vote. But I could also see it just going the other way, and by a very tight vote, 5-4 probably, they do overturn it. So how about that? I give you both a yes and a no.
All right, that's a pretty good answer. I was going to ask you one more quick question here, Paul. There is this growing trend. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it does seem, it seemed to used to be an unwritten rule that perhaps you didn't politicize the courts, right? Like, even if you kind of tipped your hat a little bit, you kind of gave a little hint as to which side you were leaning to or favored, you just wouldn't outright say it. That sort of seems to be going away. Is that an incorrect sense I have, or am I onto something here?
I think that has become so much the case that it's become one of the major things. One of the major reasons Donald Trump won in 2016 is people knew he was going to put conservatives on the court. And they said, polling showed a majority of them, that's the reason they were voting for him. So you got that on the conservative side. And we know the Democrats, they've been all in a fluttery panic since it's become this supposed 6-3 conservative majority that they want to pack the court. They want to, throw 6 new justices in there and make sure that conservatives never have this much power again. But like I said, that's sort of a very surface look to me. You got to say, who are these people? Even if they seem to be conservative, seem to be liberal, what are their friends like? Are they part of the deep state or aren't they? So I think that's the way that maybe the Trumpies would look at it is, they may call themselves conservatives, but can we trust that they be conservative? So I'm not sure the court is as much divided as people think it is.
One of the cases, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, it was a 1992 case. People don't often talk about it. It's come up in conversation, this week, but it seems like in many ways it was almost even more consequential than Roe v. Wade. Why does it get so little attention?
Well, I think because Roe v. Wade is just so famous, the term, everybody knows it. They don't know Casey versus Planned Parenthood. But so the Roe case basically said, abortions, you can have them before the fetus is viable. Casey suddenly changed that. And what they said is, here's the main ruling. You can't put an undue burden on women to prevent them from getting an abortion. There can't be this undue burden thing. And suddenly that meant like, well, then what's an undue burden? And people would say like the life or the health of the mother. And so you think, okay, well, that sounds all right. But then they decided, well, so what is this health? That could mean mental health. That could mean, well, I'm worried about what my bikini line is going to look like this summer if I'm pregnant. And all of a sudden, it meant every abortion was fine because everything could be called health of a woman, even what she thinks about herself. So that's why that ruling was so consequential, is that it got rid of all these sort of lines about when's the fetus viable or not. What matters is this undue burden on women. And so it'll be interesting to see if the court talks about that at all as in the questioning tomorrow, to see if they're still even worried about that. And that's been one of the main arguments on the pro-Mississippi side, is to say maybe way back in the Roe days, it was hard for a woman to be pregnant. Like, let's say she was unmarried. That's such a stigma. Or she's going to have a rough time with the job and all. But we have so many cases of women who are big successes now with children, like look at Amy Coney Barrett, that maybe that throws out this whole thing that pregnancy is a stigma for women. It's not a stigma. Everybody's very proud of moms and stuff like that. So the question about this stigma may be going away. But to tell you the truth, the court has not said that it's going to take that up. So I think the Casey thing, that's not going to be a big issue tomorrow.
All right. Former CBN correspondent Paul Strand, we thank you so much for spending a few minutes here breaking down what is sure to be a case that has some big ramifications in the future. Thanks so much for being here, Paul.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
All right. Good stuff from Paul there. And, as we're hearing, hopefully we can get you guys up to date and up to speed on exactly what's at stake here with this case, because Billy and Trey, we're going to talk to Abby Johnson here in just a second. Billy, with the conversation that you had with her, she's somebody who has shed a light on the horrors inside the abortion industry, and just has a lot of firsthand insight as to kind of the sorts of things that are at stake here. We can talk about numbers and throw these things around, 15 weeks and this, but when you actually see the images and you see what's actually happening, it really changes things.
Well, yeah, and what's interesting about Abby Johnson is that she's been on both sides of this, right? She was a clinic director at Planned Parenthood, so she's been on the pro-choice side, and now she is one of the most, if not the most famous pro-life advocates in the country. So you really get a good lens into what the other side is thinking, and obviously what the pro-life side is thinking. Abby, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on.
So it's a big week at the Supreme Court. They're going to be hearing oral arguments for Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Organization. This is a massive case. As you know, it's the first time since 1992 that it seems Roe is being directly challenged. Why are so many pro-lifers, I mean, obviously what I just mentioned, but in addition to that, so focused on this case?
Well, I mean, this is huge. I mean, I think that we've had so much momentum recently in the past, I don't know, probably 10 years. We've had a lot of heartbeat legislation pass in the states and then, of course, be struck down because of Roe. We've had, Prenda legislation be passed at the state level, be struck down. We've had, just a lot of sort of state battles be won and then be struck down because of Roe. And so, a lot of states are sort of saying, this is what we want. States are putting forward their will and they're saying, this is what we want. And this federal case is blocking the will of the state. And so, this is an opportunity for the states to finally take back their power, which is really what the United States was founded on in the first place, was states' rights. And so this is really an exciting time for, number one, the states to take back their power, but also for things to be sort of set right. And for these laws that have been passed previously now maybe to finally be put in action. And of course, on November 1st, the Supreme Court heard challenges to the Texas heartbeat law, and so we'll see what happens there. But I mean, this really could be for the first time, in almost 50 years, that preborn children really are defended in the womb.
So let me ask you this. You brought up the Texas case before, which is we're obviously waiting for a decision on that. That's a case that has some really intricate and interesting ways in which it was put together, but you're dealing with a heartbeat there. In this case, you're dealing with a 15-week, in the Dobbs case, abortion ban. What do you think is the better strategy? I know this is a tricky question, and before you answer, you have some in the pro-life movement who say abolish abortion entirely. You have others who will say 20 weeks or 15 weeks. There's all different ideas. What do you think is the best strategy, or the one that you would recommend moving forward?
Well, I mean, obviously, we all want abortion to be abolished completely, of course. That's what we all want. I think heartbeat laws make probably the most sense because it is the most devastating to the abortion industry. If we can't completely abolish abortion, which is what we want, then I think heartbeat laws probably make the most sense. But honestly, what makes the most sense to me is just to completely overturn Roe and allow the states to make the decision on their own. If Roe is overturned, which we don't know if that's going to happen in the Dobbs case, that is, of course, the decision that we all want. A lot of people think, well, if you overturn Roe, then abortion is immediately made illegal, and that's not true. What will happen, though, is if Roe is overturned, then we think about half of the states in the United States would immediately make abortion illegal, primarily because of what we call trigger bans or trigger laws that are already on the books. So these are either state constitutional laws that are already on the books that make abortion illegal in their state constitution, or these are laws that have already been passed that are in their state legislation that say that abortion would be illegal once Roe is overturned. So, for instance, that's what they have in my state of Texas. We have the Human Life Protection Act that says exactly that, and so about half of the states of the United States would automatically make abortion illegal. So we're looking about half of the country where preborn innocent human beings would be protected from abortion, which would be amazing. And so that's, of course, what we want. That's the strategy that we want. The Supreme Court may come back and say, within reason, a state can ban abortion. So they may say you can't take it all the way back where you can ban it from the moment of conception, but they may say heartbeat laws are fair. And if they say that, then we'll absolutely take it. I would not consider a 15-week ban necessarily a win. Banning abortion at 15 weeks plus would only ban about 10% of abortions. The overwhelming majority of abortions are taking place in the first trimester. So I feel like for this really to be a win, we need the Supreme Court to either overturn Roe, or we need them to say that states will be allowed to ban abortion in the first trimester.
Final question before we go here. What is your gut? And I know predictions can be difficult to make. What do you think is going to happen in this case?
Honestly, I'm not sure that we're going to get the win in the short term with the Texas case. I think that they may rule against us in the Texas heartbeat case, but I am feeling like we may get the win in the long term. So I am feeling like that we will get that they may end up overturning Roe or allowing some sort of reasonable state first trimester bans. I feel like I'm feeling like we will get that from the Supreme Court. We know so much more now about abortion than we did back in 1973, and particularly we know so much more now about the preborn human child. than we did back in 1973. And so I feel like that these justices are going to be compelled to actually follow the science and say that abortion is a bad product. And when a product is found unsuitable, or when it is found to be a bad product, that product is pulled from the shelf and it is recalled. And so that is sort of my gut feeling, is that they will recall the product of abortion.
Follow the science. What a way to end there, Abby. Thank you so much for joining us on CBN.
Of course. Thank you.
You know, one of the lines that stuck out to me, I would not consider a 15-week ban a win. That really struck me.
Yeah. That you know what, I wrote down the exact same one, Billy. I think that stuck out to me as well. And as you know, I think you and I were talking, Billy, earlier about how and she mentioned it, that doesn't cover. I mean, most of the abortions happen within that window. So you know, what does banning that actually do? And to her point, not a win.
Yeah, 10%. I think she said.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there are so many different intricacies to all of this and so many nuances that it's kind of an all or nothing issue when you're dealing with life. There's not just politics in this, though that certainly plays a role, but it is a life issue. So I think it's harder for people to see these small, incremental steps as victories when lives are still being ended, because that's what the pro-life side sees. So it's difficult to kind of celebrate wins, and I think that's where Abby was coming from.
And I just want to remind anybody watching right now to make sure you go ahead and sign up and download the CBN News app. We want to make sure that you are directly connected with us as possible as a Christian news network. We want to bring you truth. We want to bring you news from a Christian perspective. And the best way to do that outside of all the gatekeepers is to get connected with us as directly as possible. Get that CBN News app. Subscribe to us on all the social media pages, but while they still last, while the gatekeepers allow that to go on. So the app, and just going straight to the site, cbnnews.com, it's the safest way to get news that you can trust. So make sure you're doing that, and you'll get coverage from a Christian perspective on issues like this that you're certainly just not going to get from the mainstream media. So I want to bring in CBN's Heather Sells now. Heather, how's it going? Oh, doing great. And we're just, getting all of the information here and trying to get the audience up to speed on Dobbs versus Jackson. Obviously, a huge Supreme Court case tomorrow, as we've been talking about, has huge implications potentially for Roe v. Wade. Some saying potentially ending Roe v. Wade. So, I mean, what are you hearing from legal scholars? What are the sorts of things you're seeing being bantied about this case?
Well, one of the things I was just thinking about right now, Dan, is what Marjorie Dannenfelser, the president of the Susan B. Anthony list, was talking to me about recently. And she was just saying that this is really miraculous that we're even here. And just, we know the fight for life and what's been going on because we've all seen it playing out over the last couple of decades. But really, to think about the fact that we have a Supreme Court at this point in time that is conservative dominated, and that there is this potential to really seriously look at Roe v. Wade and really consider what it is, how constitutional is it, and should it be overturned, to even get a court that would even listen to such arguments is really miraculous in Dannenfelser's view, and I think in a lot of pro-lifers' view. And so this really is a significant moment that we are even here, that the court even agreed to take this case. You may know that I think it was they met 12 or 13 times to even consider taking this case. So again, another miracle that they took the case, and some believe the fact that they even decided to take this case shows that the conservatives on the court think that the court might be ready to take some real action. So that could be a promising sign that they are even taking this, that they're taking it because they want to do something. They want to perhaps either overturn Roe v. Wade, or they want to, in some ways, begin to move in more of a pro-life direction.
So Heather, let's talk about some of those actions a little more specifically, because right now there's a lot of questions. It's not a black or a white issue when it comes to Roe v. Wade, right? Whether it stays or it totally goes. And there are different breakdowns of this, but what are some of the different options, if you could just summarize for us, of what could happen at the end of this case?
Right. There's a lot of ways the court could go, and no one really knows, of course. And this is the first time this court has decided on abortion or looked at an abortion case, this new court. So everyone, is really, in a way, guessing as to how the court is going to act here. And hold on one second, because I'm just going to, okay. So, of course, the court could rule that the Mississippi law is constitutional, and that could potentially overturn Casey v. Planned Parenthood, which was the big 1992 decision, and at least partially overturn Roe v. Wade. So that is one outcome, and that would be a really great outcome in terms of pro-life advocates across the country. And then in that case, the issue would really just then go to the states, and each state would be creating their own laws or using the laws that they have in place around abortion. And we can talk more about exactly how a post-Roe America would play out. But if that doesn't happen, it's also possible the court could simply answer no to the main question. And that main question is, are all pre-viability bans on elective abortions unconstitutional? And then the high court would then turn it to the case back to the lower courts to decide whether this Mississippi law is constitutional or not. Another possibility is that the court would not overturn Roe, but that it would uphold the Mississippi law, and then that would signal to the states that the court is potentially interested in more restrictions around abortions. So those are just some possibilities. There's a lot. No one really knows for sure. But I think that there's some definite hopes in the pro-life community about what's going to happen. And I can tell you this too. The court regularly hears abortion cases. And so people like Catherine Glenn Foster, the president of Americans United for Life, say, hey, if not now, we expect that the court will hear another abortion case soon. And we expect that soon we are going to see some serious changes in our abortion landscape. So that is a note of hope for the pro-life community. I can tell you that those who favor abortion, those who advocate for abortion, really believe some serious changes could be coming. And that is because they're literally mapping out the country. Well, both sides are. But the abortion supporters are saying, hey, look, if Roe gets overturned, here's the states that will still have abortion on demand. How are we going to get women to travel to these states? And they're literally mapping out the country in terms of travel and how are we going to get women to where they can get an abortion. There's also a lot of conversation about abortion pills. And there's a big interest in both sides on abortion pills because a lot of women now use those. And you could see situations playing out where, say, a state has a ban on abortion, but women in that state can still get access to mail order abortion pills. So then how do we regulate abortion pills? There's already a lot of conversation about that. Even you've got people saying, that abortion supporters used to say, hey, an abortion is between a woman and her doctor. But now that is all changing because if a woman could just order an abortion pill online and have a quick telemed call with someone, how is that all changing in terms of women interacting with their doctors and really being medically supervised in the abortion process? So a lot of questions around abortion pills too in the days to come.
Look, Heather, we've seen over the last several decades, we've seen a downtrend in abortion, but we just reported on faithwire.com about CDC data showing that it's actually potentially going up for the first time in many, many years. And also you and both Paul Strand also mentioned the possibility of really creating two Americas. All that to say, what do you think this means culturally? Are we really creating two Americas? What's the best messaging here politically moving forward for each side?
Well, there's, of course, a lot of concern about the polarization in our country right now. I do think that especially on the pro-life side, you're really seeing calls for this issue to be decided at the state level. And you're in fact, Regent University filed a friend of the court brief saying, hey, look, we want to talk about federalism. We want to talk about let's have this issue go back to the states. We don't want the Supreme Court. We don't want unelected officials, if you will, deciding national policy on abortion. So I think there's a definite movement, at least on the pro-life side, to say, hey, let's let the states decide this. In that case, of course, I think you would see a very divided country. You would see some states with abortion on demand, some states with bans on abortion, some states in between. So I think eventually that's where this is going to go, where it's going to be more of a state or local decision in terms of how different communities think about abortion. And the country really has a lot of profound disagreements on abortion and what it means. I also am glad that you brought up, and I want to touch on this, the numbers of abortion, because that is one of the arguments that has been made, especially in Casey, that women have come to rely on abortion, that women need abortion. And as Catherine Glenn Foster and others have pointed out, abortion rates have come down. So it's harder to make the case that women are relying on abortion. And then there was also a really interesting friend of the court brief that was filed by 240 pro-life feminists. And they are making the argument saying, hey, in Roe, the court said that it's going to be such a hardship on women if they cannot have access to abortion. This is a terrible thing to do to women. But what these pro-life feminists are saying is we are very offended that you would think that we have to rely on abortion. And they are saying there is no data that shows that women are not able to succeed, both in terms of education and the workplace, because of abortion, that there's no correlation there. So really interesting to think about this whole concept that a lot of the abortion supporters have built up over the years, that women need abortion to advance in life. And a lot of pro-life feminists pushing back and saying, no, that's not the case.
Yeah, fascinating dynamic there for sure. CBN's Heather Sells, we appreciate you stopping by here for a few minutes and breaking all this down.
You're welcome.
All right. So interesting stuff there, guys. And, Billy, I think about the polling and the popularity. I think there's such a misnomer out there about the popularity level of abortion. And I know, they might ask a sweeping question. Do you support Roe v. Wade? And you might get a fair amount of people that say yes. But then when you drill down on that, the numbers tell quite a different story. You've done some reporting on this, over the years. And what are the types of polling numbers that you see?
Yeah, the crazy thing with this issue is that you can make the polling numbers say whatever you want them to say. And I'm a big defender of polls, but based on how you ask the question, if you say to people, as you were just saying, do you want to keep Roe? Most people say, yes, we don't want to get rid of Roe v. Wade. But when you start to actually get into the issue of abortion, one of the most shocking metrics is that the vast majority of Americans, and not just Americans, but pro-choice Americans, would actually cap abortion at 3 months. And that cap is really interesting because here we are talking about, 15 weeks. 3 months is 12 weeks, right? So it's even earlier than what we're seeing in Mississippi. And so when you start to look, and I think to me, that's a much more reliable number when you're actually talking about the issue. You're not shielding it in a controversial Supreme Court case that people have a lot of emotion on. You're actually asking people, what would you do on this issue? And so we definitely see the majority of Americans actually in agreement. And so while there are lots of different opinions about where that line should be, obviously, is it 6 weeks like Texas? Is it 15, weeks like Mississippi? There is agreement that at 3 months, the majority of the country would love to see that cap happen there.
All right, I want to head over to Matt Britton now from 40 Days for Life. He is general counsel there. And Matt, you have been a litigator for some time here, and you have seen your share of pro-life related cases in the courtroom. We've heard some opinions on what's going to happen today or tomorrow, and subsequently when we finally get the decision and their arguments, down the road here, perhaps next summer. So what do you see here? What do you see happening?
Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned, and this court is the one to do it. There's a solid 5-4 majority with the help of Donald Trump, and thankfully, and even if Roberts joins, a lot of times the person who shows cowardice, which I think Roberts did in the Louisiana case, voting against himself in the Texas House Bill 2 case, and then in Louisiana saying, well, I have to vote this way because of stare decisis, which is this old concept that the court has that they don't overrule themselves, although they've done it over 300 times, and we would still have segregation and slavery if they didn't do that. But in any event, costing the lives of about 7,000 Louisiana babies a year. But now we have a solid 5-4 majority. And I think Roberts, when confronted with that, will join, and it'll be 6-3. And Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned. Roe v. Wade is bad law. It's always been bad law. Every lawyer knows it's bad law. RBG said it was bad law. It was poorly decided on a fake concept that was invented. The right to privacy, abortion's not mentioned in the Constitution. Privacy is not mentioned in the Constitution. And once you create a bucket, as Justice Scalia used to say, you can throw anything you want into it. And that's what they've done. Everybody knows it's bad law, and they're going to throw it out. And then it's going to go to the states under the 10th Amendment. What is not reserved to the federal government is reserved to the states, although most of our leaders ignore that. But that's what's going to happen. So it's not going to end abortion, but Roe v. Wade is going to be gone next year when this opinion comes out. And I think everybody
let's talk about Senate Bill 8 in Texas, which is a very different law, right? The way that plays out, it empowers citizens to be the ones who are going to basically take things into their own hands and sue over abortion. When you compare that to the Mississippi ban at 15 weeks, which one is the better legal argument in your view?
Well, they're wildly different. The better legal argument, if you're a pro-lifer and you love life and you believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the gospel of life, as we do at 40 Days for Life, and you believe that every child is born in the image of God from the moment of conception to the moment of death, then you like Senate Bill 8, because Senate Bill 8, the so-called heartbeat bill, it's genius. It's absolutely genius. It's based on the sanctuary city ordinances, first started in Lubbock. There are about 40 of those ordinances in the country now. And in order to have a constitutional violation, the government has to act, right? So if your neighbor breaks into your house, they are committing burglary maybe, but they're not violating the Fourth Amendment. They didn't need to go get a warrant, right? So if they break into your house and they find a meth lab, sorry, I always use I was a DA for a long time, so I use criminal analogies. But if your neighbor breaks in and calls the cops and says, hey, my neighbor has a meth lab, well, they can still use that evidence. But if the cops don't get a warrant and they kick in a door, then that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, right? You have to have a warrant upon oath and affirmation. So the genius of Senate Bill 8 and the sanctuary cities started in Lubbock are that all the state does is give a private right of action. If anybody creates an abortion, commits an abortion, conspires to have an abortion except the woman herself, then anyone can sue them. So the abortionist kills an unborn child, even for a willing woman, and anyone in the state of Texas can sue that abortionist. And so it renders abortion essentially null and void, because it is at the time of heartbeat, which is 5 to 6, the latest 8 weeks. And because most women don't know that they're pregnant at 5 or 6 weeks, then there can be no abortion. It essentially and effectively ends abortion in Texas. The Dobbs case is quite different. Dobbs flies in the face of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade essentially said you can't restrict or ban abortion pre-viability. If the baby's not viable, it's a free-for-all. You can have any type of, you must have any type of abortion. Mississippi, wrapping itself in glory, in my opinion, as did Alabama and many other states, banned abortion at 15 weeks. That is in the face of Roe v. Wade. They did it so that Roe v. Wade would be challenged. I know that you had someone on earlier who said that there was a possibility that they would just vote that the Mississippi law is to be upheld. That, in my opinion, that cannot happen. It's an absolute ban at 15 weeks, and they are irreconcilable. They're inimical to one another, and they're going to say that, I don't know whether they're going to uphold the 15-week ban or not, but they are going to state that Roe v. Wade is dead, and that the states have a right to govern the abortion at any stage. And then it's going to go to the states, and 38 states out of 50 already have trigger laws one direction or another. So if you're pro-life and you don't care about Roe v. Wade, you just want abortion to end, you like Senate Bill 8 and all heartbeat bills. If you just want to see the march towards a constitution, see, none of this will end abortion. And we're all guessing about it. And this is why at 40 Days for Life, we say prayer, fasting, and then community outreach, right? Because even if this court overrules Roe v. Wade, even if that happens tomorrow, well, it won't happen tomorrow, but after the arguments tomorrow, even if that happens, there could be a new court, right? Biden can pack the court with 150 judges, and then Trump wins again and he can put 500 judges on. There can be a new Roe v. Wade. There can be a new Congress. Congress could ban it. But there's only one God, and God gave us the gospel of life from the Alpha to the Omega. And that's why we need to fight in the courts. Look, I'm a lawyer. I've fought my whole life for justice in the courts. We need to fight in the legislatures, but we're going to win this on our knees. Because if no doctor will commit abortion, and if no woman wants an abortion because we love them, you know what sidewalk counseling is? Standing out there praying, and when the woman walks up, you telling her, I love you, and I love your baby, and I'll help you. That is how we're going to win. No women will, you know, I went to Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal, where 30% of all abortions in Portugal are committed at one facility, and there is not a single Portuguese doctor there. They have to fly the doctors in from Spain because the Portuguese doctors will not kill the unborn, at least in that facility. That's what we need in America. When women don't need to go into an abortion facility, when they don't need to kill their own child, right? And we know this to be true. So we can talk about Amy Barrett. We can talk about Justice Roberts and why he was a traitor to life all of a sudden after all these years of being a faithful Christian and being faithful to the pro-life. We can talk about that. But we need to end abortion by telling young women and that we love them, and by having men act like men, not getting women in that situation, not encouraging them to have abortions, not driving them to abortion clinics, and not paying for it. Because that's what Roe v. Wade, I mean, that's what Planned Parenthood is about. They make money.
Matt,
when you go into an abortion facility, there's a cash register, a place to kill your baby, and a little chair, a hard molded chair where you get orange juice and crackers till someone comes and picks you up. That's what's in there. And if that cash register isn't necessary because no one's paying for it, they close down. Yeah, sorry.
I know you're fine. I just wanted to ask if this does effectively, like several people have suggested, end up creating two different Americas, one where more conservative states end up passing stricter pro-life legislations and others go in the opposite direction. How can pro-lifers then step in and make the argument to try to bridge the gap that's created by that ultra-divided country?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a practicable and a practical answer. I was just in New Mexico and Colorado, and they were saying that a lot of women were traveling from Texas to get abortions. You know, Colorado was shamefully the first state to give America abortion, and now New Mexico took away its abortion effective ban and now they have open abortion. So I went down there to visit all of our campaigns, and they were telling me that there's a travel. And when they found that out, more people came out, and there were more campaigns, more prayer vigils, prayer and fasting and counseling. We will help you. Prayer and fasting and counseling. We will help you. And so when those women come from other states where abortion will be banned, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and they go into the pro-abort states like Colorado and New Mexico, we will be there. We will be there. You know, one time a woman shouted out to me when I was at a prayer vigil, "Where were you in 1976 when I had my first abortion? Where were you?" Well, I was 10 in 1976. I was in elementary school. But the point is valid. And no longer will anyone have to say, "Where were you when I went in to kill my own baby?" Because we're there. And when we are there, we know from Abby Johnson and Sue Thayer and Jules Green and Ramona Trevino and so many other great former pro-aborts that have come to Christ. You know, Sue works for us. She was Planned Parenthood Director of the Year in Storm Lake, Iowa. And they will tell you 75% of abortion appointments go away when you're just out there praying. I think we have
Yeah.
a divided America.
Hey, Matt, I hate to cut you off there, but we are running low on time here. So I do appreciate you taking the time and explaining this and all the work that you guys are doing over there on behalf of the unborn. So appreciate it, Matt.
Great. Pray for us at 40 Days for Life. Thank you.
All righty. Take care. All righty. All right, guys. A lot of information there. And I think we're getting all angles here on this case. And, the implications that are happening here, what's at stake. Hopefully you're getting a better picture. We've talked about the science, how it's advanced since 1973. We talked about the implications of what's going to happen if this thing does go through. Is it really overturning Roe v. Wade? And so we're hearing all sides of it here, guys.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a real lens into what to expect, right? And I think going through that history is so important, and we've done a bit of that today, being able to kind of dig into what was Roe v. Wade, what was the Planned Parenthood case, and being able to distill that info. I think it prepares us to see what's going to come tomorrow during the arguments.
All right, let's head over now to a very special guest here. We've got Melissa Ohden, and she is the founder and director of the Abortion Survivors Network. And the Abortion Survivors Network Education and Policy Center. And Melissa, how are you?
I'm well. I am coming to you from my hotel room in DC. I got in last night, did some press conferences, saw former Vice President Pence today, met with senators as they were preparing to talk about their support of the Dobbs case on the floor today. So I apologize, but it's a good day to come to you from a hotel room.
Yeah, no problem at all. And, we've talked a lot about the ins and outs of it. As you said, former Vice President Pence, issuing some strong statements on this case, this upcoming case. And we've talked about the ins and outs of the legality and what's coming. But you're a living, breathing example of why cases like this matter. So why don't we start and tell a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. I am one of the babies who have lived to tell their story of a failed abortion. I am 44 years old. We'll just get that little minor detail out of the way. But it's important as we talk about the Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton decisions, because my birth mother was forced to have an abortion not long after abortion was legalized here in the United States. My birth mother fits most statistics when it comes to abortion, being 19, a college student, unmarried to my biological father. And, sadly, we also know she fits the statistic of being forced to have the abortion that was meant to end my life and forever changed hers. It's never pleasant to hear about what an abortion procedure entails, but I'll share a little bit about that with you. The procedure that I survived that was forced upon my birth mother was a saline infusion abortion, and it involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. Usually the procedure lasted about 72 hours, but we actually know through my medical records that I soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days. They, of course, believed that the abortion would be successful. And that 5th day of the abortion procedure, they induced my birth mother's labor, believing I would be a successful abortion. And lo and behold, I was accidentally born alive that day.
I mean, wow. And I've heard your story before, and I've often wondered, hearing you tell it again, so many people might, remain quiet about their story or hold it in. You've decided to share this story, and not only share it, but to be an advocate for others. What made you make that choice to be so open in sharing this story and really, building a ministry out of that?
Definitely the grace of God. I'm the first person to tell people I'm a pretty private person, believe it or not. And, I love that God has pushed me out of my comfort zone and really given me the strength to share his story with the world, because my life is a miracle over and over again. And so I've been involved in pro-life ministry now for, almost 15 years. And, people used to ask me, do you think abortion will end in your lifetime? And I used to say, not mine, maybe my children's. But I have every hope that Roe versus Wade is going to be righted by this case.
Yeah, and you have such a powerful testimony, and I think a lot of times people hear these stories and they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to relate because I mean, your experience is a miraculous experience, and it's one that a lot of people have no bearing and no way to relate. So, how have you found best ways to communicate with people who are maybe on the undecided side or even on the pro-choice side? How have you effectively communicated your faith and your pro-life views to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, you may not be able to relate to what it's like to survive an abortion, but hopefully you can relate to me on a human level. Yes, I'm somebody who survived an abortion, but guess what? I'm somebody's mom. I'm somebody's wife, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's friend. And I think when we couch things in those terms, that helps to solidify the humanity on either side of the issue. And it bridges the humanity to the child in the womb. I'm the same person now that I was in the womb. I'm just in a different stage of development. And I even said that to members of Congress back in June of this year. I testified against the Women's Health Protection Act, which, wasn't protecting women's health at all. It was about advancing abortion. And I really begged them that question of, seeing their humanity and mine, that they're the same person in development, just in a different stage of development, just like me.
How did finding out about your story impact you? I mean, that's something I've always wondered. I've never had a chance to ask you because we talk so much about the amazing story and the miracle that you are, but how did finding that info out impact you?
Yeah, absolutely. Finding out that you survived a failed abortion is a pretty painful experience. I mean, that would be putting it lightly. I knew at the age of 14 when I accidentally found out my survival story, I knew that God had a purpose and a plan for me. I could feel it in my soul, but it was incredibly painful. Whether you find out at 14 or you're in your 70s, which some survivors do find out when, their parent is on their deathbed or their grandparent is on their deathbed and they're sharing these family secrets. It's very painful because we live in this culture that has, deemed lives like mine the dreaded complication of abortion. We live in a country where we can't even be in our hotel room right now without knowing that there are people outside on the sidewalk chanting for the very act that was supposed to end our lives to be upheld. It is a very difficult experience, and our culture really piles on the shame and embarrassment that so many survivors feel. And so, yeah, I definitely felt shame and embarrassment and guilt for surviving, mixed with this incredible purpose that I knew God had a plan for me. Most survivors really struggle with rejection. We're born into it, no matter what circumstances our birth mothers were facing at the time. We feel stress emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. There's just so much that we're still unpacking, and that's really part of our mission at the Abortion Survivors Network is to heal abortion survivors and families who have experienced failed abortions and really start to educate the public about who we are.
What do you think it is? You mentioned just kind of the horror of abortion and obviously your personal story there. And I often think about it, from a biblical perspective. We can look back at Old Testament stories and think, how could they do such a thing? And I feel like abortion is the thing in our modern times that, if we were a Bible story, right, our generation right now, like hundreds of years from now, they'd look back and say, how in the world did they let that happen? What do you think it is that causes people to be so accepting of abortion?
We hear those arguments, don't we, in our culture that say, this is how it's always been, this is how it's always going to be. And we know that this is not God's plan for us. This is not God's plan for the world. God intended for life. And it's really that human broken condition, I truly believe, that has led us to this place. And, what an incredibly sad state of affairs we have faced in the United States. And really what's happened in the United States, we know that, other countries have looked to us for an example. And so, I have every hope, because I know, and it makes me emotional, I know that God has ordained this time for each and every one of us and the members of the court. And I know that when we see a change here in our court, and yes, it gets kicked back to the states, other countries and state by state, they're going to look for an example. And so what an important time for each and every one of us to be that example. This is what God is calling us to be and do.
So what's your you mentioned you were a little bit hopeful here early on in in our conversation, and as you watch these events unfold, and this case is approaching, there's other cases going on around the country, what's your outlook here, and your optimism and your hope as far as what's going to happen in this case and maybe beyond?
We've definitely seen it from about 2019 here into 2021. We know that a lot of the aggressive abortion legislation that was sweeping the nation, think New York, Virginia, Massachusetts, North Carolina, when they were even stripping protections for children like me who survive failed abortions, that was definitely a posturing for what the abortion lobby and industry and those politicians, knowing that a day like this could come. And so they have been on the defense for quite some time, fearful of Roe versus Wade falling. So I think, I hope that people find encouragement in that, because I do, seeing what that was really all about. And so I have every hope that when we finally get this decision in the spring, that it will be the undoing of Roe versus Wade and really set into motion what you've heard time and time again today, that this will get kicked back to the states. And that, as we're pending the Texas heartbeat bill ruling, we have many important cases that the court is considering. And, there have been, I think I heard 500 different pieces of pro-life legislation in the last year alone that have been introduced. It's hope upon hope upon hope. And, lest we think that this is all political, to really echo what you heard in the last segment, this is also about each and every one of us doing what we are called to do every single day to make a difference in the lives of the women and the men and the children that we encounter.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of what you're just saying there. So much of this is drowned out often, it seems, by political noise. We've already seen one senator, Senator Jean Shaheen, has said that if this doesn't go the way she wants it to go, if it doesn't go the pro-choice direction, it will mean revolution. So they're already foreshadowing as some sort of that this is all a political issue and is not an issue about life. How do you push through that and talk about the issue of life and say, because a lot of people will say, well, you've got an incremental victory, why not be happy with that? And you can say, well, still lives are being lost even with a small victory. So how do you communicate that effectively?
We talked a little bit about this at a press conference this morning, and it was such a good lesson for us all. We need the measure of the court to be changed, because unfortunately, as people really are responding to messaging, we know how powerful those messages from the top really are. And so until the people have reason, we need to have laws that communicate the importance of life. And so many people don't even understand really the basics of what Roe and Doe really opened themselves to. And so, I think this is a great opportunity for people to have a really important conversation and an opportunity to learn about what those cases did, what the state of abortion is in the United States. There was just more information put out today about the increase in abortions in 2019, and the fact that chemical abortions now account for, I think it was 43.7% of abortions. Yeah. This is not something that is settled law, and it's influencing lives every single day, taking lives like mine, impacting generations to come. So this is not a time where it's just political. This is affecting everyday lives, and it's being played out on the political spectrum.
Why do you think it is that this issue, it seems to have a diverse array of people? You have atheists, you have feminists, you have people like yourself. What do you think it is that draws all these different types of people together for this one issue?
It's the tie that binds us, which is humanity. All of us can and should be able to relate to the plight of the preborn child because that's where we came from. And so I would hope that people would look at the speakers at the rally tomorrow, which I'll be there. I hope people look at the diversity of those speakers and recognize that really that is humanity. That is the thread and the tie that binds us all. And isn't there a lesson to be taken from that?
Mm.
If you had somebody in front of you right now who was on the fence, right? And we talked about this a little earlier, but on the fence, they're listening to your story and you have a chance to move them in some way. What would you say to them?
There's so much I would like to say. You have a birthday, right? You have a birthday. And I have a day that I now celebrate as my birthday, which happens to be the day that I was accidentally born alive. What is the difference between you and me? Why is it that other people can have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we have a whole population of people who are still denied that right? And then if they're accidentally born alive, they are shamed, ridiculed, still not recognized under the law, and not given any opportunity by and large in the mainstream media to have a voice.
Wow, powerfully said, Melissa, and really appreciate you stopping by here to give your story, and appreciate all the work that you're doing and over there as a founder and director of the Abortion Survivors Network. And God bless you for all you're doing, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Wow, that was fantastic stuff right there from Melissa. And it's always interesting to hear that perspective from someone who, you know, when you consider it a clump of cells, as so many people do, the act of abortion, they say, it's just a clump of cells. And you look at a real living, breathing human being like that who's just, you know, so articulate and well-spoken and everything else. And it just really hits home.
Yeah,
it does. You know, you heard her say there about this was the day that I was, you know, born alive, that I was supposed to die, that I celebrate as my birthday. And it brings this entire debate into this area of humanization that I think so often it gets pulled out from. And here you are looking at this woman sharing this story, and she very well wouldn't have been with us, right? Had the circumstances been different. And so it just reminds you that these are human beings that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Billy, I know you had a chance to catch up with Alveda King, and so I wanted to get a glimpse of that conversation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened there, and then we'll go to it.
Yeah, the one thing about Alveda King, she always leads with prayer. And so we had an amazing chance to sort of talk through faith, but also her story, her personal attachment to the abortion debate, something she found out in her own life that we had a chance to speak through. And obviously we talked about the Dobbs case as well. So take a look at what she had to say. Alveda King, thanks so much for joining us today on CBN.
It's always good to join you. Hi.
So, you know, one of the things about your ministry and your work that I've always admired is your approach with prayer to everything you do. When it comes to the Dobbs case and what's going to happen before the Supreme Court on Wednesday, what are your biggest prayers going into that?
Well, of course, our Bible examples of every battle that was won depended on the Lord and prayer and obedience to the Lord. We learned that. And when I say we immediately would think of Martin Luther King Jr., my father, Reverend A.D. King, my grandfather, Martin Luther King Sr. I was a youth organizer in the movement of the 20th century, the civil rights movement. And we were undergirded with prayer. What I've noticed now is such a case as the Dobbs case that we're going to be hearing and talking about and praying about is that people across America and around the world have been praying, asking God. We have repented, we have forgiven others, And we are ready for a change. The tide is turning. So with prayer, it is my prayer and the prayer of many that the hearts of the Supreme Court justices will be melted and they will just do what's right to serve genuine justice.
And what do you hope to see? Obviously, in light of that, you gave some clues there, but what do you hope to see happen at the end of this when it comes to Roe versus Wade?
When we look at the Dobbs case, and I've been very close to the AG, the governor of Mississippi is very, very strong in wanting to support life. So I believe that with a decision that would be fair and just, we would be turning the corner and getting back to maybe state by state, and still case by case in some instances, but an end to Roe v. Wade, which is very, very bad law. And so I think we are on our way and well underway to seeing genuine justice for life from the womb to the tomb, regardless of skin color or personal conditions of the mother or the child or the family. I believe that we are well underway for justice for babies in the womb.
Now, you've been a voice for the unborn for a long time, and there are so many issues that you've spoken on. And obviously, you are part of a historic family. What is it that has led you to continue speaking up so fervently over the years?
I became pro-life in 1983. And as I was coming to the Lord between 1983 and 94, devoting my whole life to what is righteous and just, I found out after I became a born-again Christian that my grandfather had rescued me from abortion in 1950. I called it a prophetic ultrasound. Granddaddy said he saw me 3 years before I was born. He described me to my mother, and my parents chose life for me in 1950. So I was going to end up on this trajectory anyway, but once I embraced life and the rightness of life, the correctness of life from the Bible viewpoint and the civil rights and social justice viewpoint. You may have heard me say a woman has a right to choose what she does with her body. The baby's not her body. Where's the lawyer for the baby? How can the dream survive if we murder the children? For women who are still saying, if you end abortion, especially legal abortion, you will make slaves out of women. They'll be forced to bear children. Well, that's not really true. In many instances, we can decide prior to becoming pregnant not to become pregnant, and we do have those choices. My favorite method for that, of course, is natural family planning, where you don't have to take shots, pills, or surgery, and you just don't have babies. So I want to say to the women of America and around the world, I agree. Our bodies are sacred, but the babies are not our bodies.
Well, listen, Elvita, we are going to be praying alongside you this week. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I know it's a busy week for you with the Dobbs case, and we just so appreciate you being here with us on CBN.
Thanks for time to have the conversation.
And the sun was just peering down on her right over that at the end of that interview, Billy. Is maybe something a little sign of things to come, perhaps.
The more fervent the conversation got, the more the sun came,
Yeah.
as you could see. Now, I loved what she talked about in her own personal journey and her story of becoming a Christian and then finding out after about what had happened to her and how she had been rescued. It just reminds me that God always has a plan for our lives, and you can see how it's unfolded for her to become such an advocate on this issue.
Yeah, and I didn't actually know that piece about Alvida's story. So it's really inspiring to hear that what she learned and became pro-life after becoming a Christian. Then also Melissa's incredible story that we all just heard. I think it's the takeaway here is that stories like those that end up moving the needle on the pro-life issue. That's what changes people's minds. So I think we just need to elevate more and more of those stories as we hear them.
Yes, and absolutely. And I just want to let everyone know, aside, as we mentioned before, from going ahead and downloading the CBN News app and getting yourself as closely connected to CBN as you can so that you're not going through the gatekeepers, head on in tomorrow. We are going to have on cbnnews.com, we will have the opening arguments tomorrow. You can watch them. Remember, tomorrow they're just hearing it all out, and you're going to see it all play out, and then they're going to take a few months to get their arguments and their decisions after it. So But tomorrow, it's all being heard, and you'll be able to watch it on cbnnews.com. And that is all the time we have for today. So we thank you so much for being here, and we just pray that you have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time. God bless.